Summertime in our town was known for two things: thick woods and the thrill-seeking teens who dared to hike them at night. My friends, Nate and Aaron, were always up for a good scare. So one evening, we grabbed flashlights, stocked our backpacks, and set out into a nearby forest that had more than a few urban legends about strange disappearances. It was just after 11 p.m., and the summer heat was fading as a slight chill filled the air. We didn't expect to get scared, not really. But as we ventured deeper, the atmosphere shifted. We took a narrow trail, one Nate swore he'd been on a dozen times. After about 45 minutes, we found a small clearing and decided to take a break. Aaron set his backpack down and cracked open a soda. Everything felt perfect. Dark woods, close friends, and only the distant sounds of night creatures. But then we heard footsteps. They didn't sound like ours. These were deliberate, heavy steps, a steady crunching of leaves in the brush. We exchanged wide-eyed looks, waiting for someone to laugh and reveal the prank. But Nate's face was pale, and he was staring in the direction of the noise. Aaron was the first to break the silence, muttering, "Probably a deer, right?" Just as the words left his mouth, the steps quickened, growing closer until they were practically circling us. I shined my flashlight toward the noise, but all I saw was dense foliage. Nate grabbed our gear, whispering that we needed to go. Aaron and I didn't argue. As we hurried back toward the trail, the footsteps seemed to follow, now accompanied by an eerie, low whistle. It wasn't melodic or playful. It was chilling, mechanical, and relentless. We broke into a run. In our scramble, Aaron tripped, sending his flashlight spinning into the darkness, and the whistling stopped. The sudden silence was almost more unnerving than the sound itself. We helped Aaron up, our breaths ragged, and continued moving as fast as we could. By the time we burst out of the woods and reached Nate's car, we were drenched in sweat and shaking. Nate's voice cracked as he said, "That whistle, it was right behind us. None of us dared to return to those woods that summer, or the one after." The story, though, still sends chills down our spines every time we talk about it. Sometimes, when life gets too chaotic, solitude is the only cure. That was my plan last summer when I decided to spend a weekend alone at a remote cabin my uncle owned. Nestled deep in the mountains, the cabin was a rustic spot with no cell service and only basic amenities. It was the perfect place to disconnect, just me and nature. I arrived in the late afternoon, the air still warm from the summer sun, but the heavy surrounding trees cast shadows that made the cabin feel more isolated than I'd anticipated. After unloading my things, I settled into the quiet of the forest. The only sounds were birds chirping and a soft breeze that rustled through the trees. As night fell, I felt a comforting stillness. I lit a small fire in the old stone fireplace, cooked a quick meal, and kicked back in an armchair with a book, relishing the peace. Around midnight, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a faint knock on the cabin door. It was soft, tentative. I jolted awake, my pulse spiking as I strained my ears to listen. Nothing. I waited, staring at the door, but the knocking didn't return. I told myself it was probably just a branch knocking against the side of the cabin, brushed it off, and went back to sleep. The next morning, I stepped outside to check for anything out of the ordinary. There were no branches near the door. In fact, the area looked undisturbed. Uneasy, but unwilling to let a few noises ruin my getaway, I pushed the incident to the back of my mind. That evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains and shadows stretched across the forest floor, I found myself feeling strangely on edge. I decided to go for a quick walk to shake off the nerves, heading along a narrow trail that looped through the woods and back to the cabin. The silence felt heavier than usual, and every twig that snapped under my feet seemed unnaturally loud. I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling a prickling at the back of my neck, as if I were being watched. When I finally returned to the cabin, I spotted something on the front porch that hadn't been there before. A small bundle of twigs, tied with a red string. My heart skipped a beat as I approached it, every instinct telling me to leave it alone. But curiosity got the better of me. I knelt down, noticing that the bundle was arranged in the shape of a small cross, and the twigs appeared freshly snapped, the leaves still green. Shaken, I tossed the bundle into the trees and quickly went inside, locking the door behind me. I tried to calm down, convincing myself it was just some prank left by local kids. But as darkness settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. I put every light in the cabin on, hoping to drive away whatever uneasiness lingered. Around 1 a.m., I heard it again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. This time, they were unmistakably on the cabin door. My heart pounded as I approached the door, gripping the handle with a sweaty palm. I forced myself to look through the small peephole, expecting the worst. But no one was there. Just the empty porch, bathed in the dim light of the lantern I'd left outside. I backed away from the door, the silence inside feeling suffocating. I didn't sleep that night, instead huddling in the armchair with a flashlight and a kitchen knife at my side, listening to every creak, every rustle outside. Dawn finally broke, and I felt a huge wave of relief, as if the daylight had somehow cleansed the air. I decided that was enough solitude for one trip. I packed up, eager to leave, but as I closed the cabin door, I noticed something on the doorstep. Another bundle of twigs arranged in the exact same way as the first. Heart pounding, I jumped in my car and didn't look back. I haven't returned to the cabin since, and when I asked my uncle if anyone else knew about the place, he told me no one had been up there in years. To this day, I can't explain what happened that weekend, but I can still see those bundles of twigs in my mind, as clear as the day I left them behind. Last July, my friend Sam and I decided to take a cross-country road trip to celebrate finishing college. We'd mapped out a route through some of the most scenic national parks, eager for adventure and freedom. For the first few days, everything went smoothly. Long stretches of open road, warm summer breezes, and endless laughter filled our days. But on the 4th night, something happened that neither of us will ever forget. We were driving through a desolate part of Arizona around midnight, the stars above us the only lights in sight. The fuel gauge started dipping into the red zone, and we hadn't seen a gas station in miles. Finally, a dim, flickering sign came into view, a small roadside gas station surrounded by nothing but desert. Relieved, we pulled in, noticing how eerily quiet the place was. The lights inside the station were on, but the place looked as if it hadn't seen a customer in ages. Dust clung to the windows, and the neon open sign buzzed weakly, like it was hanging on by a thread. Sam decided to stay in the car while I went inside to pay. As I opened the door, a rusty bell chimed, and I found myself in an old, cramped room lined with shelves full of faded, dusty snacks. A faint smell of mildew hung in the air. At the counter stood an elderly man with pale, nearly translucent skin, his eyes hollow and dark. He watched me without saying a word an unsettling smile on his face. Just filling up," I stammered, feeling oddly nervous. The man nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. I handed him cash, and as he took it, his hand felt ice cold against mine. He didn't say a word, just kept that creepy smile as he gestured toward the pumps outside. I left the station feeling uneasy, glancing back to see him still standing there, watching through the grimy window. As I got back to the car, Sam was frowning, staring out the window. "Did you see that?" she asked in a low voice. "See what?" I replied, looking around. The desert stretched out endlessly around us, the station the only sign of life. There was a figure, she said. It was standing by the pump, but when I blinked, it was gone. Feeling a chill creep up my spine, I shrugged it off, telling her it was probably just her imagination. We finished fueling up and quickly got back on the road, eager to put that strange stop behind us. But as we drove, an unsettling feeling hung in the air, and neither of us spoke much. The road ahead was pitch black, and the only sound was the soft hum of the engine. About 20 minutes later, we saw headlights appear in the rearview mirror. The car was coming up fast, way too fast for this empty stretch of desert highway. It pulled up dangerously close to our bumper, its bright lights nearly blinding us. Sam squinted, trying to make out the driver, but the headlights made it impossible to see who was inside. "Just speed up and lose them," she whispered, her voice tense. I pressed down on the gas, but the car behind us matched our speed, tailing us closely. I glanced at Sam, who was gripping her seat, her face pale. The car stayed on us for miles, not backing off, not overtaking us, just lurking. Then, without warning, the headlights cut off, leaving us alone in the darkness again. I slowed down, half expecting the car to reappear, but there was nothing behind us, just the empty, moonlit road stretching on for miles. "Maybe it was just someone messing with us," I said, trying to shake the fear that had taken hold. But Sam shook her head, looking out the window. "No, something feels wrong, really wrong." We drove in silence for another hour, our nerves on edge, until we saw a sign for a small motel up ahead. Figuring it was better to get off the road for the night, we decided to stop. The motel was a rundown, one-story building with a flickering vacancy sign that barely lit up the cracked parking lot. The front desk clerk, a young woman with tired eyes and a blank expression, handed us the key without a word. Our room was damp and musty, but we were too tired to care. We both lay down, exhausted but unable to sleep. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps outside. They were slow, deliberate, and far too close to our door. I held my breath, listening as they stopped, then resumed, pacing up and down the narrow walkway outside our room. Sam sat up, her eyes wide, and we exchanged a terrified look. The footsteps stopped right outside our door, and a heavy silence filled the room. Then a soft knock echoed through the quiet, followed by a faint, familiar whistling, a tune I had heard back at the gas station. My heart pounded as Sam whispered, "Do you think it's the guy from the station?" Before I could answer, the doorknob rattled, as if someone were testing it. I grabbed my phone, ready to call for help, but there was no signal, just an empty no-service icon mocking us. The rattling stopped, and we heard the footsteps retreating slowly down the walkway. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night, listening for any sound that might indicate our unwelcome visitor was still nearby. At dawn, we hurried to check out and get back on the road. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced back at the motel. Standing in front of our room was the elderly man from the gas station, his face still locked in that unsettling smile. We didn't stop again until we were hours away, finally finding a crowded truck stop where we could catch our breath. To this day, Sam and I don't know who or what was following us that night, but I'll never forget the look on that man's face, or the haunting whistle that seemed to follow us through the dark desert.